Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be with you. My name is Andy Mills. I work for the University of Glasgow, where I am curator for the Archaeology and World Cultures collections there. So it's lovely to be speaking with you this evening, as it gives me the opportunity to discuss a few of the wonderful Pacific artworks that we look after in the collections of the Hunterian Museum. Now, these fall within the World Cultures collection that I curate. And the 7 artworks that we're going to be looking at today all come from Polynesia in the Central Pacific Ocean. So this area, Polynesian art history, is where I conduct my own personal research in world art history. And I'm hopeful that my choice of topic and artworks for today's talk will show you some of the reasons why Pacific art historians love this regional art world so much. So the Hunterian's Pacific Art Collection is arguably the strongest collections area within the World Cultures collection at the museum, and it includes several works that have evoked significant international interest among Pacific art historians anyway, over the years. So to give you some general background to the Hunterian, if you don't know it, the Hunterian is the oldest public museum in Scotland and was founded in 1807. It's a general university museum, and like other museums of similar age, it's named after its founding donor, the anatomist and royal obstetrician William Hunter. That's royal obstetrician to Queen Charlotte, the wife of George III. So when Hunter was alive, his private museum was displayed in the apartments above his anatomy school on Windmill Street in Soho in London. Now, Hunter's will of 1781 already mentions South Seas curiosities as the final and newest section of his collection. So that was 2 years before he died. Now, when Hunter died, 1783, his collections were estimated to include somewhere in the region of 200 items from the Pacific Islands, from Alaska, and the Pacific Northwest coast of North America, what's primarily British Columbia today. So after 24 years in stasis after his death, the collection was transferred to Glasgow in 1807 and opened to the public in 1808. So the very restricted time period at which William Hunter bought most of the artworks that we're going to look at today, between 1775 and 1781, puts them into a highly restricted category of Pacific material culture, artworks that can only have come from a handful of people who sailed on the Royal Navy's 3 voyages of Pacific exploration led by Captain James Cook, which spanned the period 1768 to 1780. So some of these items are therefore among the earliest collections of Pacific art ever made in several oceanic nations and returned to Europe. Consequently, we can learn many interesting things about the traditional arts of 18th century Polynesia from them. So this is important to do for its own sake as a branch of the world's art history, but also because Polynesian art and culture were rapidly transformed thereafter, first by the introduction of iron carving tools and industrially woven textiles on exactly the same voyages that I just mentioned, and second by a rapidly following full impact of introduced disease pandemics, of colonialism, and the Protestant missionary movement. And this triple whammy, as I like to think of it, of dreadful impacts transformed Polynesian society irrevocably after that point. Sorry about that delay. So now you're looking at an oil painting here from the collections of the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. And this is one of William Hodger's paintings of Tahiti and the other Society Islands in central Polynesia. Very lovely, as you can see. Now, he completed these during Captain Cook's 2nd voyage of exploration. So although I can appreciate the qualities of Hodger's paintings just as much as anyone else, as a Pacific art historian, I'm mainly interested in them as primary historical documents about indigenous Tahitian boat building in this case, and other art forms. So in this particular painting, you can see 4 different types of Tahitian boat. The one second from right is particularly interesting in being a sacred or temple ship, shown carrying a shrouded corpse, which is this white bundle that you can see sitting on the deck there. So now what's particularly interesting to me are these tall totem pole-like carved figures that you can see on the top of the prow. So we know from early written sources that these figureheads, if you would like to call them that, but they weren't, were the spiritual embodiment of the boat's personhood, which might also be the owner's ancestral deity. So small offerings of food and prayers were made to these gods to secure safe sailing, good fishing catches, and victory in battle. So other gods were also transported from place to place on board such vessels as well. So the interesting thing is that nothing like these tall carvings exists in the world's museum collections of Tahitian art today. So we're presented with the very real possibility that their disassembled parts are scattered across several museums as individual wood carvings. And I want to talk to you about one of those now. So what you're looking at here is a small statuette that's been stylistically attributed to Huahine in the Leeward or Western Society Islands, and now in French Polynesia. And this is a ti'i, a carved deity image in anthropomorphic form. Various different types of deity image were made in wood, in stone, weaving and fabric throughout the Society Islands and Central Polynesia more broadly. And this one belongs to a group of wooden statuettes that tend to be called fishermen's gods in the art historical literature. So their key qualities are this squat form carved from a single hardwood log with an oversized head and a prominent protruding belly, emphasized by small vestigial arms. So this emphasis on the head and belly is typical of Central Polynesian statuettes more generally. It expresses the religious principles of traditional Polynesian religion, in which the head and the abdomen were the most sacred bodily resting places of mana, the supernatural force of metaphysical efficacy through which every person's and every god's intentions were made a material reality in Polynesian thought. So the statuette's form demonstrates that it exudes mana in this way. The simplified and abstracted way the facial features, arms and nipples are carved is typical of work done in hardwood with basalt-bladed adzes and chisels. Almost all of the known examples have either a mortise or tenon carved on their base or on their back for jointing to another piece, or, as you can see in this example, have evidence of being fixed on the top of a larger carving just below the feet. And you can see here this transverse hole drilled through the base of the left leg, which indicates that. So this sculpture is almost certainly one of the South Seas idols, quote unquote, described as being on display in the Hunterian Museum in 1813, when Captain John Lasky wrote the first guidebook to the museum. So this thick coating of black varnish that covers the statue today is typical of artifacts that were on display in the first Hunterian Museum between 1808 and 1869, and as a result subjected to early Victorian preservation methods. So next. So staying with pre-Christian deity images from the Society Islands, I mentioned earlier that they're extremely diverse in form and function. So while ti'i images of wood or stone take on an anthropomorphic form that we just saw, this remarkable artifact is a to'o. Now, deity images like this one are much more abstract representational vehicles, as you can see, for supernatural beings to manifest in. Now, some to'o have a central core of carved and polished wood, perhaps with one or more shells that might be thought of as the location of the deity's soul, which is then heavily wrapped up in a dense bundle of either bark cloth, that's a non-woven textile, or finely plaited coconut fiber cordage, or a combination of both. So generally, these koya cordage wrappings end up becoming more than half of the image, as you can see here, onto the outer knotted surface of which are attached simplified cordage, eyes, mouth, arms, and legs sometimes. So this example that we have in the Hunterian, shown here, is one stage further along that progression from a clear human figure towards abstraction, where both the wooden or shell core and the vestigial human features in basketry seen on other examples have completely disappeared. So what we're left with is a rolled and sealed wrapping of knotted koya, which surrounds at its center 16 or more folded lengths of plaited coconut fiber cordage, knotted at both ends. So there appear to be no other contents, or the contents were removed at some point in history. It was then sealed up with 9 hoops and other lines of cordage. And what this artifact does, therefore, is create a physically contained space, a knotted basketry skin, if you like, so that a spirit can enter that space. Now, religious chants were repeated over coconut fiber cordage as it was plaited in this condition and knotted together. And these magical rituals enabled the knotted cordage core to become a va'a, literally a canoe, but in this case, a canoe for a deity to voyage into this world from another. So wrapped up and bound, this to'o became the deity's worldly body. Now, it's a strange artifact. I would hope you would agree. It looks strangely unlike anything else, and even more strangely, it almost doesn't look like anything at all. This aniconic quality seems to be the main point of it, in fact, a blank space for something to inhabit. Now, what you see visually is the mechanical outcome in fiber art of a lengthy performed event of sung magical ceremony to make this spiritual container, rather than an artifact attempting to make you, the external viewer, see it as resembling anything at all. So in this way, it's a document of an act rather than an image which is intended for your consumption. So we see this consecrating application of fiber wrappings and bindings in the ritual activities of traditional religious belief systems throughout Oceania. In conjunction with the reciting of appropriate chants and prayers, such wrappings and bindings enable the metaphysical efficacy, the mana of artifacts to be consecrated, to be concentrated, and to be insulated for use. So this leads neatly onto our next artwork. What you're looking at here is an early 19th century Tongan Akau war club, which was donated to the museum by the Reverend Dr. George Turner, prominent 19th century missionary in Oceania in the middle of the 19th century. So as I hope you can tell, in contrast to the Tahiti figure I showed you first, this weapon was carved with imported iron tools. So these artifacts, ostensibly very simple and carved in a single piece of iron wood, are actually extremely complex and diverse, both in their shape and in their engraving. More than 70 distinct formal types have been documented, and more than 300 different engraving motifs, individual motifs. So this particular two-handed sword-like form is called a paki-paki, and during the early 1800s, it was the most popular of many different types of hand weapons carved in Tonga. So highly refined in form, it has mathematically defined principles of proportion, and such weapons were devastatingly effective in close quarters hand-to-hand combat. So the shallow engraving of a kowtow is among the most stylistically complex of all Pacific art forms. Although several of these motifs are still used in modern Tongan art, many of their names, their representational subjects, and they do represent things, and symbolic meanings are now only partially understood. In general, they represent the motifs and structures of Tongan architectural lashing, of Tongan basketry, of barcloth painting, and tattooing. So additionally, the selected motifs are mainly symbols associated with the Tongan chiefly class, the ho'eiki as they were called. So we can see this engraving as an ennobling operation expressing the weapon's sanctity. Thus, like the Society Islands to'o image, the engraved surface depicts a multitude of overlapping fiber art wrappings, which fulfilled the same aims of insulating and indicating the weapon's mana. A kowtow, which had successfully killed in battle, were understood to accumulate mana and to develop a named supernatural personhood over time, a spirit of fai kehe, to the extent where some became deity images in their own right. Now then, no presentation on Polynesian art would be complete without some Maori art from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and here we're returning to the Hunterian's Cook Voyage collection. So shark-tooth knives on a wooden or whalebone core were historically found in many different parts of Oceania, but in Polynesia, they were generally reserved for ceremonial purposes. So this is a Miratotini, a ceremonial knife, a knife made from the teeth of the broad-nosed seven-gill shark, which is a tuatini in Maori. And this demonstrates the exceptional quality of New Zealand Maori wood sculpture. fretwork, stretched and entangled human figures, abalone shell inlay, sinuously curved and branching lines. So the carving represents two profile manaya figures, as they're known, one forming the blade and the other forming the handle. Now, the handle is harder to see in the carving than the one at the end of the blade. But if you take the second abalone shell eye, the right-hand one, as the eye of that figure facing towards the pommel of the knife, then you'll see the beak-like mouth is the pommel. So two figures conjoined at the waist. So Miratotini were used for cutting flesh in supernaturally dangerous, that is tapu or taboo situations. So when fishing, they were used for decapitating sharks and turtles, which were particularly taboo animals. In battle, they were used to butcher slain enemies for cannibalism and to decapitate fallen comrades so that their mummified heads, toi moko, might be returned to their families. So Miratotini were also used in ritual bloodletting, which was a religious practice widespread in 18th century Polynesia. So, moving on. Next, we come to this amazing Maori bordered and feathered cloak, a Kaiaka huru. So when the Maori settled Aotearoa, New Zealand in the 14th century, it's thought, they brought many plants with them from the Cook Islands. However, their traditional plants for producing garments, pandanus and paper mulberry, were entirely unsuited to New Zealand's temperate climate. Thus followed the domestication of harakeke, the endemic New Zealand flax, from which this 18th century cloak is finger twined. Now, there are many, many different styles of Maori cloak, but the Kaiaka is rendered particularly beautiful by this intricate tarniko border that you can see at the bottom of the cloak. Now, this cloak in particular is further ennobled with alternating groups of kiwi, parrot, and other feathers in grey-brown, that's the kiwi feathers, blue, red, orange, and white. So Kaiaka were generally worn with the tarniko border at the lower edge, meaning that this example is particularly unusual in having its feathers pointing upwards rather than downwards. Examples with this feather orientation do exist in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but they're extremely rare. I mean, less than half a dozen. And as a result of that, there's been debate about the orientation at which this cloak would have originally been worn. So it's been closely examined several times by modern Maori weavers as an archive of 18th century weaving techniques, and this work, providing research access for Indigenous scholars to reconstruct the lost artistic techniques of their ancestors, is one of the most important things that we do at the Hunterian. Now, I want to close this brief overview of Polynesian artworks by looking at a pair of Hawaiian drums from the founding collection once again. So Captain Lasky's 1813 guidebook to the first Hunterian museum that I mentioned earlier explicitly mentions the display containing two drums from the Sandwich Islands, as the British called Hawaii at that time. So their absence from the museum's donation books prior to 1813 shows that they were part of William Hunter's founding bequest and were therefore acquired by Hunter before his death in 1783. So Hawaii has an important role to play in the history of the Hunterian's Pacific collection, because Cook's third and final voyage was the first known European visit to Hawaii, and the only voyage to retrieve Hawaiian art and bring it back to Britain before Hunter's death. So William Hunter is known to have purchased an uncertain amount of Pacific material culture at the June 1781 auction of David Samwell's collection, Samwell being surgeon's second mate aboard HMS Resolution during Cook's third voyage. So as its name suggests, this short pahuhula drum was used, played to accompany hula dancing in 18th century Hawaii. The drum has a sharkskin tympanum, as you can see, stretched across a carved wooden cylinder with zigzag lashing and a base modeled in two rows of crescents. Now, a comparison with other pahuhula drums shows that these crescent forms are highly abstracted from a traditional row of caryatid figures with their arms raised, and you can see these on many other drums of the same period. So, very beautiful thing. Now, as I just mentioned, the previous drum forms a pair with this other one, smaller and higher pitched. Early historical accounts describe Hawaiian drummers playing them in pairs, each drum with one hand. So Hawaiian drums of this small coconut shell form are called pu-niu, literally a coconut drum, niu being a coconut, and are generally termed knee drums in the art historical literature. So they were played on the drummer's knee with a small flexible beater made of plaited coconut fiber. Again, shark skin tympanum is tensioned with 23 strings of fiber wrapped around the circular base. So something you can only see by looking at the underside is that a small piece of kapa bark cloth is tucked in between the coconut shell and the carved base, presumably to cushion the fragile shell and dampen the tone. So as Indigenous Hawaiians seek to preserve and renovate their remarkable traditional arts and culture in the 21st century, this minor but integral detail is exactly the kind of micro-historical cultural information that museums are in a unique position to reconstruct and restitute. Now, I've just got some closing remarks. So that brings us to the end of our time here, I'm afraid. Now, what I hope to have given you in a handful of artworks is a sense of the enormous breadth, complexity, and diversity of traditional Polynesian art. Now, when we place these artworks from the Hunterian collection in their appropriate historical and cultural context, we can begin to see their technical nature and their achievements in a richer light. We can begin to understand the aesthetic values and religious conventions that inform their manufacture, the signification of mana, metaphysical efficacy, and tapu, metaphysical prohibition, the production and carved representation of fiber art wrappings to insulate those supernatural qualities, the production of specialized artifact forms for restricted use when those supernatural qualities were to be overcome, in the case of the Miratotini, and the tangible visual art that was produced to support Polynesia's much richer intangible cultural heritage, dance, poetry, storytelling, and song. So within a framework of world art history, I also hope to have shown you the important role that such world cultures collections have to play in the 21st century. Nowadays, museums talk a lot about the repatriation of non-European artworks from European museum collections, and some of the artworks I've shown you are potential candidates for future repatriation to their home nations, where they will meet with wider cultural appreciation than here, one would expect. Now, beyond repatriation, however, the broader legacy of collecting Polynesian art by Captain Cook and other Britons who followed after him is one of entangled and shared histories. As a result of their actions, we've inherited many responsibilities to publish and publicize the non-European arts that we curate in our museums, to facilitate Indigenous research on these artworks, and to conduct research ourselves towards the common goal of reconstructing the world's art history and understanding it in its proper context. Thank you very much.